In a horror story, the victim keeps asking why, but there can be no explanation, and there shouldn't be one. The unanswered mystery is what stays with us the longest, and it's what we'll remember in the end. My name is Alan Wake. I'm a writer.
It's not often that literature and video games are spoken in the same breath. They can almost seem at odds with one another on completely different ends of the entertainment spectrum. Alan Wake, developed by Remedy Entertainment, is a rare game that attempts to meld the two mediums, but 13 years after it originally released, can it still weave a yarn worth playing?
Shh, baby. Just another nightmare. Everything's fine. You dozed off.
Right. Anything more than dozed off would be news for everyone.
Cheer up, handsome. We're here.
You are Alan Wake, a hugely successful author currently afflicted with a novelist's greatest fear, writer's block. In the hopes of finding new inspiration from a little time off, the titular character travels with his wife Alice to Bright Falls, Washington, a quaint, quiet town that seems perfect for providing a little R&R. After receiving the keys to their vacation home from a questionable-looking woman, Alan and Alice settle in, only for things to quickly take a turn for the worst. Before the end of their very first night, Alice is taken. Thinking she's been dragged into the lake surrounding their home, Alan jumps in after her, only to then awaken in a crashed car with no memory of what happened to him. From there, it's a wild goose chase to determine what happened to Alice while contending with some of Bright Falls' less than friendly inhabitants. The story of Alan Wake is told at a blistering pace, as you'll rarely go more than 30 minutes without another cutscene appearing to progress the plot. While this cadence feels right for the game, the narrative of Alan Wake ultimately disappoints for a number of reasons. The primary issue is that the writing, ironically, isn't up to snuff and is one of the most dated components of the game.
Everyone calm down. Put the gun down. We're all friends here, right?
Cool your jets, Nightingale. We got him.
Many of the lines sound straight out of a B-movie from a bygone era. It probably scraped by without much issue in 2010, but the medium of video games has grown quite a bit in the subsequent 13 years. The iffy dialogue leads to many characters feeling more like caricatures, with the worst offender being Barry, Alan's outspoken and ridiculously dressed agent.
Who are you?
I'm Barry Wheeler, his agent. If you have business with Mr. Wake, you talk to me. You yokels won't know what hit you once I sick my lawyers on your asses.
Alan narrates her actions as the game progresses, which is a novel idea, but it doesn't really add much to the experience, with him often stating the obvious. It's difficult to articulate, but there's just a strange lack of polish present in Alan Wake's narrative. Lines are often delivered at a weird pace, the pre-rendered cutscenes are sometimes strangely directed, and the dialogue volume is often mixed way too low, relative to the game's other sound effects. Alan Wake seems so proud of its story, but the delivery lacks the cinematic quality you'd hope for, even with the game's 6 chapters being presented like a television miniseries. Whenever the pen is handed to you, you'll find yourself running through the various forests and buildings of Bright Falls, flashlight in hand. Progression is strictly linear, with little room to stray off the beaten path. Typically, Alan will see a specific location far off in the distance, and then it's up to you to get him there in one piece. Standing in the way are the Taken, enemies that resemble humans with frustratingly impressive knife-throwing accuracy. Thankfully, Alan is equipped with a handgun in addition to a flashlight to keep the Taken at bay. The latter tool is equally important, as there's a catch to Alan Wake's combat. Instead of simply shooting enemies, you first need to render them vulnerable. You do this by shining the flashlight on them long enough to dispense with their dark aura. Once they're weakened, Alan can follow up with some standard gunshots to put them out of commission permanently. Enemies typically attack in groups, which means you'll need to pencil in some multitasking when taking them down. Just as is the case in real life, the flashlight's beam is narrow, so you can only really focus on lighting one enemy at a time. The Taken will not wait for you to eliminate them one by one, so you need to quickly aim the flashlight at different enemies to spare yourself from taking an axe to the face. Dissimilar to real life is your flashlight's abysmal battery life. You'll find dozens and dozens of batteries throughout the game, as each one only lasts a bafflingly short 8 or so seconds before needing to be swapped out. Suspension of disbelief is required in almost any story, but the horrific AA performance is difficult to take seriously. Perhaps Bright Falls should begin importing a different brand. Alan will find himself eating through bullets just as quickly as batteries. You'll find a plethora of ammunition on your adventure, on occasion in the form of crates that literally allow you to fill up to your maximum carrying capacity. If you haven't already gathered, Alan Wake is survival horror in theme only, not in its gameplay. This is more accurately defined as action horror. Combat is more predicated on quick reflexes than carefully placed headshots. In fact, once an enemy has been primed for damage with the flashlight, you just have to aim in the taken's general location for Alan to hit his mark. The skill required in Alan Wake's combat doesn't come from accuracy or ammo conservation, but from juggling larger, aggressive groups of enemies. This choice is a refreshing divergence from other third-person horror games, but the combat often ends up being more frustrating than invigorating. Enemies will engage Alan from all sides, which is exciting, but given that you have to bathe everyone in light before you can kill them, you're almost guaranteed to take hits during skirmishes, even if you don't feel like you did anything wrong. Alan's health will replenish automatically, so getting attacked doesn't carry a huge consequence, but getting wailed on often spells lights out for Alan before you have a chance to assess the situation and react appropriately. These issues are compounded by Alan's painfully limited sprinting capacity. It doesn't take more than a few seconds of holding down the designated sprint button for Alan to get winded, meaning that putting distance between him and enemies is often unfeasible, especially given how quick the taken are. I love fast, dynamic enemies, but they feel at odds here with Alan Wake's combat mechanics. You essentially have to kill each foe twice, once with the flashlight and again with the gun. I appreciate the innovation of this idea, but it feels like it would be more well suited for a proper survival horror game. Thankfully, the upcoming Alan Wake 2 has made that genre shift, with its flashlight mechanic intact, so I'm excited to see if it functions better there. Alan can acquire a few different optional weapons that help ease the rigor of combat, such as a shotgun or even a flare gun, which is expectantly effective against enemies so averse to light. It's interesting to see how the light mechanic changes the function of standard video game weaponry. For example, you can acquire flash grenades a bit later in the game. Typically a secondary weapon used to blind enemies, they're lethal in Alan Wake, capable of dispatching entire groups of enemies in a pinch. While I think the execution of the light mechanic in combat is disappointing, the idea itself is unique and deserves to be explored more. There are even a few interesting segments that strip Alan of all weapons, forcing you to use a defensive item, like flares, to keep enemies at bay while you attempt to cover ground. Alan himself moves fluidly throughout the game's world, but his limited sprinting capacity again rears its ugly head with regard to the game's environments. Despite being linear, they're fairly open, occasionally housing small, hidden areas. Unfortunately, exploring often means exposing yourself to more enemies, depleting your resources, and leading to frustration. The compulsion to just run past enemies eventually creeps in, but because Alan possesses such poor stamina, this option holds limited value. Finite sprint duration is beginning to feel antiquated. I'd argue that a game should either allow the player to sprint indefinitely or craft the environments around this limitation. Alan Wake fails to do this, making its many nondescript forest settings feel bigger than they are, simply because traversing them begins to feel like a chore. There are dozens of collectible manuscript pages and thermoses tucked away throughout the game, but I quickly lost the motivation to seek them out. On occasion, you'll get a break from immediate threats with some daytime exploration, which helps to ground you more in the game's world. It's in these sections that you explore some of the town's more memorable landmarks, but they feel all too short, with Alan Wake quickly setting the sun and thrusting you back into the combat-filled night. Bright Falls is a fantastic setting for a game, so it's a huge shame that so much of Alan Wake is spent in repetitive forest areas that feel more like video game levels than parts of an actual town. The occasional puzzle or set piece does help to vary the pacing, but for the most part, the game suffers from a lack of variety. For a 13-year-old game, Alan Wake holds up pretty well in the presentation department. This remastered version, released in 2021, runs at a silky smooth 60 frames per second, and it never gets old watching Alan's flashlight bouncing off the environment. That being said, it bears repeating that the environmental variety is sorely lacking. Up close, things aren't as impressive. Despite receiving an update from the original, the character models look, slightly unwell. Compared to the recent remaster of Red Dead Redemption, Alan Wake clearly received more love, but its age shows, nonetheless. On paper, Alan Wake is directly up my alley. It's filled with good ideas and commendable ambition, but concepts and intentions can only take a game so far. Alan Wake is absolutely not a bad game by any means, but its core mechanics and world just don't deliver on their potential. It feels like, well, a game of its era. With many titles of this time finding success in the action genre, it seems like Remedy may have felt obligated to make Alan Wake fit into that mold, instead of their true vision of a more methodical experience. This is just a theory, of course, but with the aforementioned Alan Wake 2 fully leaning into survival horror, it seems like one that may hold water. Hopefully, the long-awaited sequel is more of a page-turner.